Welcome to part 6 of this ZBrush character creation series, where today we're going to be taking a look at adding some of the definition, some of the musculature to our model. Now, where we left off last time, we've gone and drawn in the bony landmarks on the model so that we can actually see a little bit as to the anchor points where some of these muscles are going to go. And I'm going to now start sculpting on the model here and adding some of the definition, some of the detailing that is going to come from the musculature. Now, I'm not making with this model an overly muscled figure. I'm not looking to make a bodybuilder or a superhero or anything of that nature. And so I do want to be very subtle with the muscles. I'm also working on a typical female build, which means I'm also going to be very subtle in some of these muscles. That being said, I am going to sculpt them larger than I would want them, and I'm going to then use the smooth brush to hone this back, to pull it back to an area where I'm more happy with the look. To begin with, I'm going to be using the clay buildup brush. Now, one of the reasons that I like the clay buildup brush is that it is big and square and janky, and I love that. That makes it really, really hard to start honing in on tiny little details, which is exactly what I want to avoid. I want to be spending my time here blocking in musculature, so I'm not going to be spending a lot of this time going in and doing fine little details. The other thing that I want to manipulate here is if I hold Shift on my keyboard, I'm switching over to the smooth brush, and currently you can see that the smooth brush has its own set of inputs here that it's looking at. So right now, if I hold Shift, it's going to be smoothing my RGB. What this means is that in holding Shift and smoothing my model, it isn't going to smooth the topology alone, but it's also going to fade or blend my paint job. And so I kind of want to avoid that. I want to leave this sculpting that's here, or the painting that's here rather, as a means of defining where things go. And so I don't want to blur that out. So while holding Shift, I'm going to turn off the RGB. And that's going to make sure that when I smooth anything, it doesn't smooth my model. Now, also, in order to get the paint job to work at a high enough resolution that we can see it, I'm up over 2 million polys, which at this point is kind of overkill. The reason I bring this up is that if you sculpt on your model and you find that smooth is not removing it enough, in order to make your smooth brush stronger, you can always reduce your subdivision levels down to something lower, and that will then allow you to smooth out that shape. So if I smooth it at the highest subdivision level, drop down and smooth it, and drop down and smooth it, and then drop back up and smooth, you can see that we can actually completely undo that stroke. And so if you find your smooth brush isn't doing quite nearly as much, you're not getting the strength out of it that you would like, don't hesitate to drop down in your smoothing and go and get that level that you're after. Okay, to begin with, I'm going to start up around the top of her neck here. I'm going to leave the face for a future video where we are going to concentrate solely on the face. I'm just going to be working on the anatomy of the body here, so that is going to simplify my workload a little bit. So I'm going to begin here by looking at the sternocleidomastoid muscle, which comes from behind the ear and goes and connects pretty straight into that suprasternal notch. So this is one of the muscles here that helps you twist your neck around in different directions. I'm going to go and kind of define that. It's this nice big thick muscle here, and again, most muscles should travel in fairly close to a straight line. With that done, I'm going to go and give a little bit of the secondary head. So this muscle is called the sternocleidomastoid. Sterno meaning sternum, which is where this is connecting here. The cleido part of this is the clavicle, and so that's where we're going to go connect here. There's a little bit of a secondary head that branches out, and then the mastoid is up in the back of your ear. This is the nice big bulge of muscle you get, or bone that you get back there. I'm also going to hollow out a little bit in the suprasternal notch. I want to be careful that I don't go too far with this, but I do want to add a little bit of a hollow on either side of the muscle. Now, one of the things that I see a lot when people are sculpting the musculature on their characters is that they only add. So they never use the Alt button in the Z sub version of their brush to remove geometry. And this is really, really important. We want to make sure that we are not only adding, but we are subtracting as well. Otherwise, the model just keeps getting larger, right? We are essentially just inflating the model. And so I would like to, as best I can, constantly add and subtract along the way. So I'm going to add a little bit of the influence of her throat here. And then I'm going to go in and hollow out all the way up until about the last third or quarter of her clavicle, just adding a little bit of a pit here. Now, as we swing around her body over to the back, we are going to find the origin point of her trapezius, which is going to come off the occipital bone, the base of her skull. The first few branches of muscle here are actually going to grab onto her clavicle, just ahead of the acromion process of the scapula, followed by grabbing the acromion process of her scapula, followed by grabbing the spine of her scapula, and around the point where we get the change in angle here, where it's the spine of the scapula becoming the medial border of the scapula, we're actually going to get a roundish tendon in here. And this is kind of like a shelf. So we have this muscle fiber kind of going in this way. And around the time we get to that little corner, the muscle kind of turns and starts going down towards the lower part of her back, all coming off that same point and giving us this kind of shape here. There's going to be nothing on the 7th cervical vertebra, as that is, again, a bony protrusion here. And I can actually even go and sculpt a little bit of a bump on that protrusion. This is actually the differentiation between the neck and the torso. So this is the last vertebrae in the neck before they become the vertebrae of the torso. So we're going to go again. And again, I'm trying to sculpt pretty free here of the black lines. Now, the trapezius is going to go down to the 12th thoracic vertebra. And so it's going to go all the way down her back here like this. And that's going to give us a starting point. Next, I'm going to go and define her pectoralis muscle, which is going to go in and into the shoulder here. It's going to connect to the humerus. So I'm going to start with the clavicular head as it runs off her clavicle. And I want to make sure I'm not leaving a hollow. This is another very common mistake. I want to make sure there's no hollow underneath that clavicle. So I want to just go and put this directly up to it. Now there's going to be a little bit of a break in the muscle here as it switches heads and becomes the sternal head. Since there is a gap between bone here, the muscle does not grow in that gap, and we're going to get a little bit of a split here. Now she's got breasts, and the breast tissue is going to start obscuring her pectoralis at this point. And so I'm just going to kind of really taper this sculpting off at this point. After the pectoralis, we are going to get a hollow on the clavicle, dropping down between her deltoid and her pectoralis. And so I'm going to go and just create that little triangle here. And then I can go in and start adding the anterior head of her deltoid. So this is going to come off the clavicle and go in and insert down halfway down the humerus. This is, again, another pretty big anatomical mistake that I see in a lot of models. The insertion point of this muscle is at the 50% mark of the arm. And a lot of people just make it this kind of little bubble on top, which is not correct. I'm going to spin her around, and I'm going to go and define the posterior head of the deltoid here. So this head has muscle fibers that kind of come to an end before, I'm going to bring this down to the same point here, before they go and grab into the spine of the scapula. And so this is all muscle fibers heading in this direction, but it kind of creates this rounded shape as it goes around here. And so I'm going to go and sculpt that in as well. Now, a lot of times here when I'm doing this sculpting, while I'm sculpting on her right shoulder, I'm actually looking at her left shoulder. And the reason for that is I'm getting a different lighting over here that is allowing me to see when I get these little divots and little wobbles in the geometry that I would like to avoid. So there's the posterior head. I can see there's a little bit of a wobble right there. And so we're going to go and fill that in like so. And then we can go and do the head that comes off of the acromion process of her scapula that goes this way. Okay, so we've got her deltoid. I'm going to go in with the negative, holding Alt here to Z sub, and I'm going to go and pull away some of the musculature below the deltoid on either side. This is just going to help further that shape a little bit. And again, it's going to make it that I'm not just adding volume to her, but I'm subtracting volume as well. I'm going to go in and add a little bit of influence here on the mesh as well, meant to represent her ribs. Typically on a woman who is fairly slight, we're actually going to see a couple of ribs before we get into breast tissue here poking through. As I swing around the rear of the model, we can go in and start defining. So let's hide her arms. I'm using Control and Alt to draw a box, and once I have that box, I'm letting go of Shift, and I'm adding Alt. So, sorry, I said that completely incorrectly. I'm using Control and Shift to drag a box, and once that box is on screen, I let go of Shift, and I add Alt to make it red, and then anything red will get hidden. So, with her arms hidden, I'm going to go and find the middle point of her torso, like so. I'm trying to make sure that I sculpt this coming down. This is going to be her latissimus dorsi. This is going to begin by coming down before swooping back and grabbing onto her pelvis. And then coming out from the armpit here, the top of this muscle is actually fairly horizontal here, going directly over top of the trapezius. And so I'm going to go and define some of the striations in this muscle, which are all going to fan out from that armpit, which is a reoccurring theme we're going to see here before they digitize down at the bottom here, where they are going to become little individual fingers of muscle. And you'll bring my brush size down just a little bit, and I can go and sculpt this in and bring this down. Again, I don't want to make her overly muscled here. I am just trying to define where some of these muscles live. So that one's actually going to go into the arm here and grab into the front of her arm below her bicep. So with that muscle defined, I'm going to go in and define the nice big football muscle she's going to have here. This typically can also go under the very top of the latissimus dorsi. This is her teres major, and it's actually going to disappear in and under that head of the deltoid. So the deltoid is going to go over top, and this muscle tucks in underneath. We're going to get a little triangle of muscle above that, which is the teres minor, also leaving her scapula bound for her shoulder. And then above that, we're going to get the infraspinatus, the muscle of the shoulder blade here that is below the spine of the scapula. So giving me something a little bit like that. Now, seeing that this is a female character, I am going to, at some point, go and make her scapula more pronounced. I actually want to see a lot more of that scapula bulge out. Right now, if I turn off my colorize and we switch our color, that scapula, the spine of the scapula and the medial border of the scapula are actually recessed. They're pushed down in her body. And I would like the opposite to be true. And so I am going to go and add some volume to those at some point. Down in below her latissimus dorsi, I'm going to sculpt negatively here, flattening out the small of her back, before adding in the shape of a couple of muscles on either side. They're kind of these big sausages here that go up her back. These are the erector spinae, and they help us stand upright. So they're kind of these two shapes that we get here. We're going to hide the arms again. And around from the front, I'm going to first find the suprasternal notch of her neck. That's this point here. And I'm going to draw an imaginary line that would go through where there no breast tissue on this torso, where the nipple would be on that torso, and kind of continue that line down here. So that's kind of where that line's going to go. This is going to help me define where we get the junction between her serratus anterior, which we're only going to see 3 of them on her here, which are going to be about here. So 3 of these nice little bulging muscles. There's actually 9 of them all together. And they're actually going to even disappear underneath the latissimus dorsi. And often you will get a bulge in the latissimus dorsi here, where that muscle is underneath and it is affecting the shape. And so we're going to go and kind of sit this on top here a little bit. Like that. And then coming from in between those, we are going to get her oblique. This is the external oblique, which are going to run down and kind of grab her rib cage in this way here. Again, they kind of digitize along the way, and she's going to get a nice big head down here, which itself digitizes into 3 tendrils at the back. So we're going to get this kind of 1, 2, 3 that live here, as this turns into this one kind of massive shape sitting atop her pelvis. And so we'll go and define that. I want to kind of get this nice and rounded here as I go and define her external oblique here as well as they come down. Now I'm going to switch brushes ever so quickly to the Dame Standard, and using the Dame Standard, I'm going to go and just really emphasize the separation between the 3 heads, or the 3 different branches of her serratus anterior. And then I'm also going to use this to really push the digitation here in her inner obliques, to help that a little as well. Again, kind of trying to really make sure that we get this zigzag pattern here in the side of her body. Really, how far you push the bulginess of these muscles is going to be based off the build that your character has. Again, I'm going for something kind of average, typical, everyday build, and so I'm not going to try and go overly large with these. But again, I'm going to be smoothing this out, and so this muscle detail that you get here is going to eventually kind of blend in. Now it looks like that top serratus muscle is actually leaning the wrong way, so we're going to kind of just straighten it out here a little bit. On her abdomen, using the corner of her body here, I'm going to go and define this kind of peanut shape, which is going to be the differentiation between the rectus abdominis, your abs, and the tendon and muscle fibers of the oblique. And we're going to go and give her a little bit of a navel here too. And I'm going to also go and give her a little bit of a hollow here. Again, I'm not looking to get someone absolutely jacked. I'm not looking to make someone very muscle bound. But I would like to have a little bit of a defining note here, showing me that her abs are split down the middle. I'm not going to do any splitting below that. We're going to leave that just like that. And then I'll do the same thing here. We'll kind of pull this around and define the bottom of her belly a little bit. And I'll bring this around. And then same deal here. We're going to go and just give this a little bit of volume coming down. I want to make sure that that line is not overly pronounced. And the mound of her groin, we'll cut in on her thigh a little bit here to help with that separation. And that's not too bad like that. I'm going to go in and define a little bit more the differentiation here between where the breast tissue is and where her rib cage is. Now, this is not musculature that I'm sculpting. I am simply just trying to better define the change in shape that we get from the fact that her breasts are resting upon her torso. And so I'm literally just trying to cut the geometry back down to her rib cage in that kind of way. We'll bring our arms back here, and I will go into the rear of the arm here, where I'm going to set her olecranon on. And then looking at my drawing here, now that I've centered my camera, I believe I've misplaced her olecranon. I think it's too far to the right. And so I'm kind of correcting that in my sculpt here. Now, her triceps, being that she is going to be of average build, are kind of just going to be this one large shape instead of the defining 3 heads of muscle that we typically see. And so they've kind of just softened together into a single continuous shape here that looks like this. So it's kind of got this nice big bulbous top before kind of coming down into the common tendon of the triceps down here. I'm going to use my Alt sculpting mode here as well to help define a little bit further the break in angle that happens around that muscle. As I swing around to the front, we can put the biceps brachii in and kind of define some of the shape that we're going to get from that. Again, I'm trying not to get too carried away with the shapes that we would see here, as she's not supposed to be superhero or bodybuilder, so I want to keep this really subtle. We're going to have her brachialis sit above that, and then coming out from there is going to be her brachioradialis. And so it's going to be a nice big bulging muscle here. This is going to end up twisting and going towards her her thumb, and that's because of the posture, the pose that I have her in here. Her hand is pronated, it's palm down, and because of that, we're going to get this kind of very big twist in the 2 muscles here. It's both the brachioradialis and the extensor carpi radialis longus that live here together and make this really nice bulbous shape here. Add a little bit more volume here. Make my brush a little bit bigger. If you're finding you're not getting enough volume quickly, increasing the size of the brush, the clay build-up brush, will definitely go and fix that. So I'm going to switch over to the dam standard here, and again, I'm going to try and just help out this shape a little bit more by drawing a bigger split in it. I don't like the placement there. We're going to get a little bit of a Y split in her arm here. And I will return to the clay buildup brush to go and add a little bit more musculature in the belly of her forearm. To try and fill out that shape a little bit more. Again, looking at it from kind of these extreme angles to try and fill in that shape. So I'm going to leave it at here for now, because I'm not going to go through the entire process of sculpting this. I'm actually going to end up spending a good couple of hours doing this, getting to a point where I'm really, really pleased with what I'm getting. But I do want to show you the next stage of doing this. So I've just got her kind of mid-torso here to lower torso, even before we get into her glutes. And then up and down the upper arm here, or the arm part of her body. And the next stage in doing this is going to be going in and really just pushing this back. So I'm going to turn off the colorize. This is going to allow us to just see the musculature that's been sculpted. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger, and I'm just going to hold shift, and very lightly, starting at the top, I'm just going to go in and lightly draw over the model. Now what this does is it softens each of those sculpts that I had made, or each of those strokes that I had made while sculpting, and it softens the geometry, and this kind of gives it the impression of these muscles actually being under skin and fatty tissue. And so the more you smooth, the more you use this softening, the less built the character is going to be, the more we're going to see a regular average human being come out of this. And so I'm going to go in and do this here, and there's actually a few more things that I typically sculpt on here. And I can see that I've got way too much going on in her back. And so if I drop down a subdivision level, and again run the smooth brush over this, it starts again pulling it back and softening it to the point that we start getting some pretty natural looking anatomy in here. Again, I'll soften her serratus as well. I don't really want them that pronounced. We'll soften this area of her belly here, and we'll pull those ribs back a little bit. And you can see we're actually starting to get something anatomically now that is resembling much more closely the human form. And I'm going to bounce up a subdivision level and go smooth again, just because, again, you can end up with a little bit of a weird issue if you don't do that. And again, I haven't done the entirety of the body here. We've just kind of done the upper quadrant of her torso. But you can see very quickly and easily the effect that you would get from doing this. And so if I go and throw the, let's put the poly skin on here, we get a little bit of a, in this case, Caucasian looking skin. We can also go, if I switch this to the skin shade, then have the ability to go and pick her skin tone. And so if I go pick something a little bit more dark in range here, we start getting something a little less Caucasian. And you can see that that anatomy is starting to kind of pull together. Now, it is important that you change materials as you do this, because some materials will emphasize shape more than others. And none of these materials export from ZBrush when we bring this into anything else. And so it is going to be rather important that we kind of get something that looks the way we want it to look under kind of the majority of these materials here. So the more of these things that we can look at, you know, from the basic material to the default, there's the matte cap gray, to some of the skin materials, and even going into some of the metallic materials, just to look at how shapes are responding and what they're looking like. Is going to be of great importance. Now, again, I'm going to leave the face out here, and we're going to leave this as this. And I'm going to go and spend a couple more hours kind of sculpting this out and getting to the point where I'm happy with it before smoothing it out. And that'll bring us to the end of this video. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at setting scale and getting our model ready for attire or clothing or wardrobe. And so until then, we'll talk to you next time.